Hello everyone, I'm Scruffy at Scruffy Tales, and this is the War Zone. And it's time for me to once more talk about stuff I have no clue about at all. And today we're gonna be taking a look at the Russian assault against the Ukrainian town of Avdiivka. So first of all, let's find out where Avdiivka is. You have on the left here a map of Russian occupied territory and the front line. And here we on the right you can see Bakhmut, the famous city up in the north, or north of, I should say, Avdiivka, highlighted in the south with blue. And this was the front line at the start of October, 48 hours before the Russian main offensive in the area began. Uh, as you can see on the date marked at the bottom of each picture, you have Avdiivka, and the gray blob to the northwest of Avdiivka is a large factory area, industrial site, and I believe it's a mine. And there's a slag heap, that's the light gray area to the north of Avdiivka. And this is where the current battle is taking place. And I mean, just looking at the map, it kind of makes sense if you take a look at it. It's Ukraine holds this town, Russia is pushed out on both flanks of it. It's not that strange that Russia would try and surround the town eventually with a massive push at some point. I mean, just looking at the map here and now, these old positions from the beginning of the month, it makes sense that you would try and close the gap around Avdiivka, surround the Ukrainians, or force them to withdraw to avoid being surrounded and pinned in place. Now, this has obviously been known to the Ukrainians as well. They can look at the map just as we do, and they realized we need to strengthen the flanks around Avdiivka so it doesn't get cut off. And Avdiivka itself has been heavily fortified. It's basically a fortress, and so a direct assault on the town itself would be very disastrous for the Russians. So obviously they would try and at some point try and move around on the flanks where it's easier to advance. And Ukraine, they're not stupid, so they would have prepared uh, these flanking positions for potentially eventual Russian advances. And advance Russia did eventually. At the beginning of the month, you can see the old positions, and then for 3 weeks, Russia has been pushing really hard into Ukrainian positions. As you can see, the more recent map, pro-Ukrainian map, by the way, so this is not Russian sources, this is Ukrainian sources, and they are admitting that Russia has indeed made some advances to the north of Avdiivka, and they are gaining ground steadily. Just like we saw at Bakhmut, it's costing lives, obviously, because Russians, they don't value the lives of their soldiers. They only value gaining territory. So that's what they're doing at great cost of life. And I mean, we need to keep that in mind, I think, because, we would remember the human wave attacks around Bakhmut, and everyone was like, what the hell is going on? Bakhmut is holding, Russia is not taking it. But what did Russia do? Russia, just like we're seeing here at Avdiivka, primarily made a push to the north of the town, of the settlement, the city, moved in around it, managed to get inside, tried to push in from the south, didn't really manage it because of the high ground and what have you, but they put pressure on the flanks of Bakhmut, primarily to the north of it, and managed to surround it and almost completely cut it off. And we're seeing the same thing here at Avdiivka. But we're not seeing the main push into the settlement, as far as I know, like we did at Bakhmut. But once again, they're trying to surround the Ukrainian stronghold, which makes perfect sense. I mean, we have to remember this, that Russian generals, they're savages, brutal, barbarian bastards. They are assholes, to put it mildly. But they know what they're doing. What Russian generals are doing, the commands they're giving to their troops on the operational level, makes sense. It all goes tits up once battalion commanders and company commanders and platoon leaders take over, and that's when everything falls apart. But what the generals are planning makes sense. So what has Russia managed in 3 weeks? Roughly a mile. The distance is, as you can see, I haven't really measured accurately from previous Russian positions, but roughly, roughly speaking, they've gained anything from 1.5 kilometers to 2 kilometers, say a mile, right? Uh, According to the Ukrainian mapper, by the way. And that's not a lot of territory in 3 weeks. Uh, Granted, as you can see, it's wide open spaces, wide open farmland, and you only have so many lanes of attack through the tree lanes and what have you, the wind barriers. And, Russia is struggling just like Ukraine with going through, at this point, prepared defenses, minefields, lanes of fire with anti-tank guided missiles, and artillery with prepared positions, pre-designated positions, pre-range positions. So the defenders just have to call out to the artillery, fire at this point, and then they just know instantly how to correct the guns to hit that specific point in the terrain. All the issues that Ukraine has been dealing with throughout the summer, Russia is now dealing with as they are on the offensive here. They are pushing into dug in, well defended Ukrainian positions, and they have suffered as a consequence. And I mean, it doesn't help that they try and rush down narrow roads and stuff like that, or walk in tight formations along pathways where they are easy targets when drones have found them, scouted them, and then Ukraine just calls in the firepower needed. Uh, I might do a follow-up video on what we've seen so far of the Russian tactics. Um, I can tell you this much though. Vehicles and heavy vehicles in particular, like armored vehicles, uh, behave pretty much like water, as in choosing the path of least resistance. So that means that vehicles are kind of easy to predict because the path of least resistance often means a road if it's available, because you don't want to get stuck in a field, you don't want to get stuck in a forest, and you sure as hell don't want to drive over a mountain because then you're definitely going to get stuck. So vehicles, in order to be maneuverable, will quite often choose the path of least resistance up until the point that combat begins, or you think you're going to be in combat. That's when you leave the road and head out into the terrain to look for cover and try and push through woods and what have you. So what we've seen when Russia is pushing it hard, fast down narrow roads and stuff like that, it's not that strange because they want to move fast. That's the decision they've made. They want to move fast, they want to take the Ukrainians by surprise and blitzkrieg their way up into the Ukrainian positions. The problem is, of course, if you want to do this, that means you have to move along roads. And Ukraine obviously knows that vehicles will choose the path of least resistance, so they will have a lot of guns aimed at roads. And as a consequence, Russia lost a lot of vehicles initially. But all that said, Russia has still managed to gain a foothold on the far side of the fields here to the north of Avdiivka. You have the town here, Krasnohorivka, Russian held. It's where they struck out from against Ukrainian positions. In 3 weeks, they have taken quite a lot of casualties as they've made it across these wide open farmlands. And now they've taken the wider wooded areas surrounding this. I think it's a railroad going north that runs north here. And they pushed across the fields, reached this forest area where they can now set up shop and prepare for the next push into Ukrainian positions. So what is Russia trying to do here with this pincer move in order to surround Avdiivka beyond just pushing into the town itself from the north, as they appear to be doing? Well, as I said, they're pushing out from Krasnohorivka, and they've done so straight west and south. They are also moving, trying to move north. They haven't had the same successes. Maybe 500 meters, maybe a kilometer. Again, trying to push across these open fields, moving along the narrow windbreakers, wind lanes, tree lanes, which is absolute hell. Russia is now experiencing why Ukraine is having difficulty advancing over at Robotyne. It's easy to defend these predictable lanes of attack, and when you cover the farmland with mines, vehicles can't move, and then you can funnel vehicles into kill zones where you have prepared artillery and anti-tank missiles and what have you. But looking at the map, what is Russia after, and what Ukraine probably has also realized and prepared for months, is these small towns following a main road, a highway, that if you take each town in sequence, if you follow the road, you have successfully surrounded Avdiivka. And Russia needs these towns because they've ignored them. Then Ukraine can rely on these towns to strike out at Russian advances. So there's no way around it. Russia needs to take these towns in order to successfully surround Avdiivka, which is something Ukraine, like I said, they've obviously realized this for a long time. So each town is in itself a fortification. Again, exactly the same thing that Ukraine experienced when they tried to take, what's it called, Staromayorsk and Urshayne and those towns. Russia knew that Ukraine would be coming down that one main highway, so they fortified each town following that road. And now the tables are turned. Russia is trying to push into these small towns that Ukraine have been fortifying for months. So these towns is where Russia will try and advance. As you can see, it's roughly 12 kilometers that needs to be addressed by Russia in order to complete the encirclement. And this is also how they will cut off Avdiivka. The main supply route goes through Lastokhyne. I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry. So they need to get fire onto that main highway in order to properly cut off Avdiivka. Again, path of least resistance. Trucks don't want to drive across muddy fields. They will follow the road, so path of least resistance. That is the main highway, the main road, the main supply route in and out of Avdiivka, where wounded will be brought out, where ammunition, food, and supplies will be brought in along with reinforcements. So these towns outside of Avdiivka is where I think the main battle for the town itself will be fought. Uh, and then Russia will, as it appears, try and make a move from the north as well. They will not push in, as far as I can tell, directly from south or southeast, because that is where Ukraine more than likely have the most dense defensive lines. So they will try and sneak in from the north by the looks of it. And speaking of sneaking in from the north, Russia has, in the 3 weeks of this assault, pushed in and secured the slag heap north of Avdiivka, north of the industrial site. What's it called? Avdiivka coke plant. And the slag heap is apparently under Russian control. And from here, they have basically two options. And that is attacking the Avdiivka coke plant or heading south towards the more open residential areas, or whatever you want to call it, south of the slag heap. So here you have the coke plant in blue and the other avenue here marked in, what is it? Is it brown? Is it orange? I don't know. Brown? Brown maybe? And I mean, take a look at the plant itself. It's massive. It's huge. Jesus Christ. So yeah, so there are some advantages and disadvantages attacking through the coke plant as well as attacking through the more open spaced area here where with the houses and forests and gardens. I don't think Russia will try and take the coke plant in one sitting. I don't think that is how they will try and gain access to Avdiivka. They will probably attack it in order to make things difficult for Ukraine. Because if they leave it alone, Ukraine can use the plant to strike out at Russian positions. So they need to push into the coke plant in order to prevent Ukraine to use it to launch attacks, counterattacks. But I think the main Russian assault will be through the brown area that I marked, simply because it's easier and potentially a faster approach to the town itself, to the city itself. And I'll explain why. But first of all, first we will move to the coke plant and the advantages and disadvantages. And these are actually street view images from the plant itself, from Google Maps. And this is what you have to deal with, pushing into a industrial site like this. It is basically urban warfare, but 10 times, 100 times more difficult. So why is it more difficult? Well, industrial sites have catwalks. They have ladders all over the place. Buildings, you don't have as many windows maybe, but buildings are built on top of beams, concrete steel beams that allows you to see straight through it and what have you. So there's like 1,000 angles wherever you are where a sniper might get you from. So you're constantly at risk of getting shot, even if, I mean, if you're in a town or a city, if you're inside a building, you should be safe. But you can't really get inside all of these structures at an industrial site. You will more than likely often be outside taking cover among all the machinery in the factory area, surrounded by this 3D environment where there can be enemies above you, below you, all around you, every angle imaginable. where a sniper or a machine gun might actually see you and take a shot at you. And with all these angles, you also have as many locations where there can be traps, booby traps, explosives hidden within machinery, within containers, within canisters, within whatever. There might be explosive gases stored throughout the plant. Acid containers, massive containers filled with acid. I mean, it it's hell on earth, basically, to be honest. And fighting through this won't be fun. It it's like if you want to design a place where the defender has absolute control of the situation, then give him an industrial site like this and allow him to fortify it for X amount of months. And yeah, then you as the attacker, you're in for one hell of a ride. Let's put it that way. And I mean, Russia knows how difficult it is because remember Mariupol at the beginning of the war, the steel plant that Ukrainian defenders held for months, completely surrounded by Russians, and Russia kept pushing on. So they were on their own, deep inside occupied territory, holding this one factory. And Russia just kept pounding it, kept attacking it, but they couldn't dislodge the defenders until the defenders ran out of ammunition, food, and water. That's when they gave up. And this is the same situation. Russia is now facing that very same situation. So that's why I don't think Russia wants to try and take over the factory in one go because they know they can't. And just looking at the last picture here with the slag heap, take a look at the terrain they need to cross in order to reach the factory. Wide open spaces, some forested area, yes, but beyond that, again, open spaces with this big wide railroad and all the factory buildings giving Ukraine lots of angles to shoot at anything approaching the factory site. So yeah, Russia will. It won't be easy reaching the factory, and it won't be easy getting into the factory either. And if you take a look at Western doctrine, you need at least a 10 to 1 advantage fighting in a situation like this. Never mind all the artillery, never mind all the tanks and all of that. You can have all the tanks in the world. You still need the 10 to 1 advantage when you go into the buildings to clear out each room and kill the enemy at point blank range. And the reason why you need a 10 to 1 advantage is because, you know, the odds are stacked against you as an attacker. The defenders will be holding all the cards. He knows where all the booby traps are. He knows where he can position his machine gun to ambush you and everything like that. So you might enter into a room and there's a tripwire and your entire squad gets blown up. Or you enter into a room and there's a hole in the wall and that's where they have a machine gun aimed at your doorway, and then 2 or 3 guys are just blown apart by 30 bullets fired in short order. So you need the 10 to 1 advantage in order to just survive entering these buildings and securing them and clearing them. And as you can tell, there's a lot of buildings and weird structures at this location, at this coke plant. So that's why I don't think Russia will focus on the coke plant. They will try and push into it to cause trouble for Ukraine because, you know, if they're in the factory, then Ukraine needs to deal with them. But they won't waste all the manpower trying to take the factory because they will need those guys as they push in south towards the town itself and beginning the fight in the town. But if it's so goddamn difficult taking a factory like this, why would Russia not just move around it? Or why not just ignore it and cut it off? They will try and cut it off, I think, but why would they want to push into it in the first place? Well, the reason is quite simple. If you grab a building, then the tables have turned. If the enemy, if the defenders want to push you as the attacker out, then they need the 10-to-1 advantage, right? And if you attacked with a 10-to-1 advantage, chances are that you have numbers on your side. So if the enemy wants to push you out, they are probably at a numerically disadvantage. Unless they focus all their troops into one quick massive push to push you out before you can fortify the building you've just taken. So if Russia pushes in and grabs a building, then they can get more troops in, and then they can prepare to assault another building, and then it all starts over, and then Russia maybe takes that building, and then they start to slowly gain a presence within the factory itself that Ukraine may not be able to counter because they don't have the troops in order to push the Russians out, potentially. So that's why Russia might want to try and get into the factory despite of all the dangers, because once they're in the factory, it will be difficult for Ukraine to push them out. And that means Russia can push in more troops as needed when they are available, and then maybe slowly expand into the factory, causing all kinds of trouble for Ukraine. And if Russia is in the factory, then Ukraine can't use it to launch raids and strikes into Russian positions as they slowly try to move down towards Avdiivka, for instance. And they can move out to commit raids as Russia tries to encircle Avdiivka. So, yeah, I think they will push in to deny Ukraine the opportunity to conduct raids against the Russian troops. And it will also force Ukraine to move in more troops into the factory itself in order to prevent Russia from gaining more territory within the factory, because once Russia is in, it will be damn difficult to push them out. So, the other venue of attack that I think Russia will focus on, I think they will attack the factory to distract Ukraine, to force Ukraine to fight within the factory, denying Ukraine the chance to launch attacks and open fire into the Russian flank as they're pushing down to the east of the factory into this area with forests, gardens, and housings. And this is directly south of the slag heap. It appears to be a large water processing, water cleaning site located over here, which I assume Ukraine will be defending initially. It seems like to be an easily defendable place and a natural defensive position. So Russia will probably bomb that area back to the Stone Age with artillery, and then they will move in, try and clear it out, and then the fight will continue down into the housing area, where you have what it appears to be ordinary houses, gardens along in this neatly arranged housing area with lots of trees, lots of gardens, and apparently right next to the factory. And as you can see, this area continues all the way down past the factory until you actually reach Avdiivka proper, the proper city. So I think this is where Russia will try and push in for the main assault on the town, if they're going to be pushing in from the north, because this is an area where once you're fighting in the trees, in the gardens, among these buildings, it's on an even footing. If you push in more troops, then you can start to outmaneuver the defenders. Then Russia can apply pressure and outmaneuver the Ukrainians. It's still going to be trenches, it's probably barbed wire and booby traps all over the place, but it's more of an even fight. So it's potentially an easier fight and a faster way for Russia to push through Ukrainian positions in order to reach Avdiivka proper. So if Russia attacks through here, they won't be needing as many troops as if they were focusing entirely on the coke plant. The coke plant there, they're going to be needing, according to Western doctrine, a 10-to-1 advantage. Attacking through this area here with the houses and the, this suburban area, gonna need maybe a 5-to-1 advantage. If you want to follow Western doctrine, these numbers are not always applicable or available. You obviously have to make do with what you've got. It goes without saying. But you want to try and achieve a 10-to-1 advantage or a 5-to-1 advantage or at least 3-to-1, if at all possible. In this area, you can also more readily rely on tanks and other vehicles, big guns, autocannons and stuff like that to support your push into the enemy area, because there won't be massive concrete buildings in the way that reduces the capabilities of these vehicles. Now, all that said, though, there is one major issue for Russia attacking through here, and that is Ukrainian mortars and artillery. Russia will be showered by cluster munitions if they try and go through this area, because there's hardly any hiding places at all, apart from these small buildings that ordinary artillery will be obliterating. And I mean, Russia will obviously do the same to the Ukrainians. They will shower this area with artillery in order to allow the infantry and vehicles to move in, which means there's little to no hiding places left around, which means Ukrainian artillery can then counterattack and kill the Russians as they're moving into these devastated areas. So Russia will be hard pressed to push through here, thanks to the artillery fight that will be happening as they move in. This won't be as much of an issue if you fight in the coke plant, because once you're in a building there, artillery can't reach you, right? There's much more cover around, much more hiding places. If artillery starts raining in, there will be massive lumps of metal and concrete to protect you from shrapnel and explosions. So artillery will be less of a factor in the coke plant and much more of a factor attacking through this suburban area. But despite that, I think Russia will still be mainly focusing on attacking through here, because it will allow them to, when they have contact with the Ukrainians, it gives them still the opportunity to outmaneuver the Ukrainians without too much risk of running into ambushes and getting sniped from very weird angles that you did not anticipate. And that may allows them to more quickly reach Avdiivka proper, and even cut off the coke plant from reinforcements, and even cut off Avdiivka from reinforcements. They will probably still attack the coke plant to distract the Ukrainians and cause trouble for the Ukrainians, and make sure Ukraine can't rely on the factory as this massive fortress from where they can send out raids to disrupt Russian operations. So my thoughts simplified here with this map here with a bunch of arrows. As always, if a YouTuber talks about Ukraine and draws a bunch of arrows on a map, that guy probably has no fucking clue what he's talking about, me included, just to let you guys know. So, right. So, moving on. Map, arrow, idiot talking. Moving on. Russia is pushing out of Krasnohorivka mainly towards Avdiivka and to the west. They've taken the slag heap. They will probably try and push into the factory, but not in order to secure it in one go. They want to push in to distract, disrupt, and make things difficult for Ukraine, so they can't use it fully as a base of operations. As that happens, they will in force push down to the east of the factory straight towards Avdiivka in order to reach as fast as possible the city itself to begin the fight in the city, and most importantly reach the highway leading from Avdiivka to Lastoshkyne, which is the main supply route to the town, the city. So reaching that highway, they cut off not only Avdiivka from supplies, they also cut off the factory from Avdiivka. That is the main push I think we will see from the Russians. If successful, we'll see, hopefully not. Hopefully they will end up in a small choke point, as you can see, between the dam, the lake, and the factory. If they try and push in there, the Ukraine can guide in a lot of artillery to take them out. So hopefully that will be a factor. What else? Yeah, Russia is also pushing out west from Krasnohorivka towards Stepove and Berdychi. And also we have seen them pushing north in the south towards Cherverne and Tonenke. And the idea here is to push through all these small towns, taking the road network, and by so doing completely encircling Avdiivka, cutting it off from all reinforcements and hopes of getting resupplied. Now, so far, this battle has been ongoing for, or this push to surround Avdiivka has been ongoing for 3 weeks, and Russia has suffered horrendous casualties so far. I've seen numbers talking about 5,000 Russian casualties, even as much as 1,500 within 24 hours. And obviously, we heard of the initial losses of tanks and other armored vehicles as they made that push initially out from their positions north of Avdiivka. And like I usually point out, that the decisions made by Russian generals kind of make sense when you look at it. It's not all batshit crazy. Yes, they're brutal savages and fucking horrible people, but the things they do strategically on the bigger picture seems to make sense, even to a casual viewer. I mean, when shit hits the fan, that's when things fuck up, and that is on the operational and tactical level. Like when battalion commanders at Vuhledar just sent in troops along the same predictable route of attack, and Ukraine just popped them off one after the other. That's on an operational level. That's some damn stupid decision making by a battalion commander. And then you have tactical leadership on the company level and the platoon level of things. And that's even worse. I mean, you can see how Russian troops are moving in single file along a narrow path, all jammed together, and all it takes is one artillery round to kill 50 guys, instead of, if you spread out, that artillery will only kill 10 guys, for instance. And, well, there are other examples as well. So, Russian generals, thank God that the rest of the army the Russian army is so fucked up, because if the Russian generals had proper properly trained troops and properly commanded troops on tactical level, Ukraine would be really in trouble, if you ask me. So does it make sense? Does the Avdiivka attack make any sense? Well, I think it kind of does, actually. Because if we take a look at this map, you have here the big blue arrows are where Ukraine makes their main pushes. The big red arrows is where Russia is making their or has made their big pushes. And they have all allocated troops and resources to counter these bigger assaults. And this has been ongoing for the greater part of the year, except around Avdiivka in the small box here. I mean, there's been fighting, Russia has been trying to take it and stuff like that, but it hasn't been any big movement of units in this area like we've seen at other places along the front line. So that means that Ukraine has had very little reinforcements and resources allocated to Avdiivka if compared to where they are on the offensive at Robotyne and Bakhmut, or where they have countered large Russian assaults around Kremina and Kupiansk and Svatove up in the north. So with that in mind, where would you launch a surprise attack? Well, maybe where Ukraine has reinforced the least, where they have the least amount of reinforcements, the least amount of heavy firepower, and so on. And that would be Avdiivka, right? Every other section of the front line has been heavily reinforced and massively resupplied, except by comparison, that is, Avdiivka. And like I said, this was the situation right before the Russian offensive began. And so you have this area of Avdiivka, this town that Ukraine is holding, uh, surrounded on three sides in a very exposed position, uh, where where you haven't had the same amount of pressure from Russia and not the same need to reinforce by Ukraine. So, of course, it makes sense to launch a surprise attack here because Russia already has the positions ready in order to make that final push to seal the gap in order to fully surround Avdiivka. So, I mean, I think it makes sense. I mean, as a casual onlooker, this should be a place where Ukraine has the least amount of reinforcements and resupplies ready. And it's also a place where Russia basically already has things, or everything set up in order to make this final push to grab Avdiivka. So yeah, it makes perfect sense to me why this happened. Uh, but let's also not forget that this is not a massive change on the battlefield. What's going on here? Because if you take a look at the bulge here that Avdiivka creates into Russian occupied territory, it's basically what we're seeing down the Ukrainian gains in and around Robotyne and Verbove in the south. So if Russia does take Avdiivka, it's not a massive change on the battlefield. It's what we saw. It's what we've seen Ukraine accomplish in and around Robotyne. That you pro-Russians like to point out that's not anything to report about. They've only just pushed in a couple of kilometers. So using the same logic, taking Avdiivka in terms of territory doesn't really change much on the battlefield. So yes, I think it makes sense. It primarily because it will be an important propaganda victory for Russia. It there won't be pushing on and grabbing half of Ukraine by taking Avdiivka, but it will be an important propaganda victory. I've always said that Bakhmut and Avdiivka have been prestige battles, propaganda battles, because if Ukraine takes Bakhmut or Russia takes Avdiivka, it won't affect the front line or where reinforcements will be deployed, but it will give them an opportunity to spin the victory in their favor out of proportion, obviously. And taking Avdiivka, it will make it appear as if Russia is winning and that they're capable of taking important locations and that they are victorious and they are on the march and they can do what Ukraine cannot. They can take a city. They took Bakhmut, now they've taken Avdiivka, and Ukraine have not been able to make any headway at all in the war. So that's how they're going to spin it if they achieve a victory. And so that is why it makes sense to take Avdiivka, because it will allow them to step up the propaganda war. And should Ukraine have successes, say, around Verbove, well, then pro-Russian outlets on YouTube or wherever, they can start spinning the Avdiivka victory in order to counter the reports of Ukrainian successes. They can start showing that, Ukraine lost so many Western vehicles compared to Russia or whatever and stuff like that. So this is very, very important for the propaganda warfare going on. And on the propaganda note, I mean, it gives Russia something to report back at home, something positive that they're winning. They have this one more big victory. First it was Bakhmut, now they've held the line over the summer, and now they've counterattacked and taken Avdiivka, right? So more support back home for the troops and what have you. So propaganda victory, but a political victory for Putin and his henchmen. And of course, Western media will report on Ukraine losing Avdiivka. They will report on the failure of holding the city and how Russia gains territory and pushes Ukraine back and so on. Again, propaganda victory. I mean, like I said, it's not that big of a section of the front line that will switch hands. And it won't affect the Ukrainian attacks in the south. It won't affect Russian attacks in the north. But media will talk about it and will talk about it out of proportion to its importance, which will affect how people view and see the war and affect their thoughts on, could Ukraine actually win? And of course, if Russia grabs Avdiivka, it will become a Russian strongpoint, just like Bakhmut, that Ukraine will have trouble dealing with in the future as they try to liberate the occupied territories. I mean, that goes without saying. And this is also, there's some logic here as well, because Avdiivka in Ukrainian hands means Ukraine is in a position where they could threaten the major city of Donetsk, which is in Russian hands. So if Russia grabs Avdiivka, then Donetsk is slightly more safe from the Russian point of view. So yes, I think it does make some sense that Russia is doing what they're doing. In theory, Avdiivka should be a place where it should be easy, comparatively speaking, for Russia to attack. So, and they already had the flanks prepared basically to try and encircle and cut off Avdiivka. So launching a sneak attack, surprise attack here made sense, and achieving a victory would give them a lot of ammunition for the propaganda war going on surrounding this conflict. So And of course, they would make Putin happy. The Moscow would be happy that there's another victor and all of that. So it makes sense, despite to me at least, despite what everyone else might be reporting on. The problem, though, Russia appears to be losing too many troops and too much equipment in order to be able to push on beyond Avdiivka, just like we saw at Bakhmut. So if they take Avdiivka, then they won't have any steam left to push Ukraine further back, uh, which means all of these troops will have died for very, very marginal gains in and around the town of Avdiivka. Um, and to be honest, it also means Ukraine will no longer have to manage this exposed position, and that should make it easier for Ukraine to defend against future Russian advances in the area. Like I said, uh, it's not it's not easy for Ukraine to defend Avdiivka, surrounded on all sides, and now potentially about to get cut off. If they don't have to worry about Avdiivka, well, then they'll a straight line on the map. That's all they need to defend. And with Russia having lost so much troops and equipment taken Avdiivka, the defense in this area should be all the more easy. And my German Shepherd made a sound here. And I mean, I think that, I suspect that Ukraine actually has evacuation plans. What if Russia manages to threaten Avdiivka? How do we pull out without losing too many troops? Do we want to sacrifice as many troops like we did at Bakhmut and so on? So I think Ukraine is prepared for the eventuality that Russia would have made an assault here, simply because, Russia already had Avdiivka outflanked, so it was theoretically very possible that that would happen. And so I think Ukraine will hold on for as long as possible, and they don't want to lose all the troops if the town is surrounded. So if it comes to that, they will fall back and redraw the lines. And yes, Russia will take the town, but at massive casualties, just like we saw at Bakhmut. So Bakhmut was a Russian victory. Avdiivka could potentially be a Russian victory, but they will be Pyrrhic victories. It cost too much to win the battles that the victories have no real worth in the end. And evidence of that, I think, is the state of the vehicles that Russia has used. I mean, we've seen reports of very strange vehicles from the Cold War, and old school vehicles being used to spearhead this assault, which shows that Russia is running out of proper vehicles, and losing all those vehicles in this offensive. What they're gonna drag out next, you know? Um, so yeah, they're losing equipment fast, and which should work in Ukraine's favor, but let's be real here. It doesn't matter if the armored car is from the 50s or last year, it will still protect the guys inside from machine guns. And if it has a gun, even if that gun is from the 50s, if they manage to fire that gun and, you know, the round, whatever it is, detonates on impact with Ukrainian lines, that vehicle, even if it's from the 50s, that vehicle is a big threat. So yes, maybe it's easy to deal with it with an anti-tank weapon, but you still need that anti-tank weapon to deal with it. So despite these old vehicles, Russia is still advancing. They're still pushing into Ukrainian positions and forcing Ukraine back. Uh, so yes, don't underestimate these really old vehicles, because They still protect the guys inside from rifles and machine guns, and you still need a powerful anti-tank weapon to deal with it. And so, yeah, like I said, thankfully, Russians are failing on the tactical level of things. They don't know how to use these vehicles effectively. And that works massively in Ukraine's favor. Thank God. Right, that's it. I got laundry to do, and I need to take the dogs for a walk as well. Uh, like I said, don't underestimate the Russians. The generals appears to actually know what they're doing. They organize logical assaults and they organize effective defenses, and they can set up what it appears to be the logistics and manpower and resources needed to launch surprise attacks. Uh, the problem is when majors and captains and lieutenants try to make some sense of it all, and that's when it all goes, that's when they fail miserably. And thank God, uh, Russia really needs to lose this war. And well, I'm as always rambling here at the end. Thank you for watching. Hope I made some sense. And yeah, go på marsch, Ukraine.